Bismillahi, testing my love for our ideas and my records to and from who or why is the greatest, and or the least, and or everything. Who or why can stand alone or stand with any. We must renew our commitment to the profession of arms. We're not a profession simply because we say we're a profession. We must continue to learn, to understand. Martin E. Dempsey, General, U.S. Army, Chairman of the Joint Chieves and Chieftesses of Staff. We must continue to learn, to understand from the oldest profession and its skills, attributes, and behaviors regarding stand alone or stand with, whose choice, to what degree, for how long. WLH, aka haji, MAO-AIB, unpaid unofficial volunteer, U.S. citizen and honorary world citizen. 412 of 412, William Hale, hinging 0, Tuesday, 28 February 2012, 11:12 a.m. We must renew our commitment to the profession of arms. We're not a profession simply because we say we're a profession. We must continue to learn, to understand from the oldest profession and its skills, attributes, and behaviors regarding stand alone or stand with, whose choice, to what degree, for how long. And that includes not only the Tuskegee Airmen, the Buffalo Soldiers, George Lucas, Frank Lucas, an American gangster, Vietnam, the smuggling of heroin back into the United States in the coffins of GIs from Vietnam, which resulted in the arrest and conviction of nearly a quarter or one half of the New York City Police Department. But it also includes looking forward to Star Wars and the future of a space odyssey and the kinds of considerations that will be necessary for us to survive on this planet and the next. Do you know the difference between the equal and unequal assumption of innocence and authority for each and every one? The equal assumption of innocence and authority regarding stand alone or stand with is universal conscription with military or alternate service, equal as the teeth on a comb, the shot heard round the world at Concord Bridge, the duties of membership in the collective sovereign upon which a national Department of Defense is built to defend and uphold the constitutional rights of each and every U.S. citizen. Constitution, from the Latin con meaning with and stitu meaning stand. In contrast, the unequal assumptions of stand subordinate and prostitute an all-volunteer military into a 1776 British redcoat-style global mercenary doing the work of the highest bidders who keep themselves endowed with income to win the bids by refusing to offer Department of Motor Vehicles style insurance in the sovereign level to offset the risks of potentially lethal technology, thus keeping us dependent upon their skill at using and threatening force and blocking us from being able to use sovereign, peaceful, and defensive use insurance to reduce the costs of defending against such two-edged swords of technology, and who further buy elections through anonymous fundraising organizations which hypnotize and divide and rule by slim majorities operating on borrowed funds so as to not levy taxes or require mandatory military or alternative service which would break their trance over the electorate, and who then order the U.S. State Department and military to serve U.S. interests, which are actually their own more narrow interests, and thus we are divided from our more perfect union to the profit of market forces seeking to escape their moral and legal duty to the basic human rights of the invisible hands of supply and demand, and instead leaving us, we the people, in a net loss position regarding our sovereign will when we are unable to promote the general welfare because of a domestic economy built on the threat of international force, without the counterbalance of international, sovereign, peaceful, and defensive use-only insurance, which reduces the risk of harm upon U.S. citizens and their families, and provides compensation in the event it does occur, wherever they might be, and which also reduces the costs of the common defense, currently draining our budget and making the threat and use of force our largest U.S. export, supporting our dollar currency through the mutual extortion of global COP and big oil so they can pay one another for fuel and protection. And further, the unequal assumptions of innocence and authority have subordinated and prostituted our sovereign duty to serve and stand side by side in domestic tranquility with our international American siblings, African Americans, Chinese Americans, Korean Americans, Vietnamese Americans, Iranian Americans, Iraqi Americans, Mexican Americans, Uruguay Americans, whoever they might be, because our love thy neighbor nation diplomatic and military policies now use an all-volunteer method, which has been prostituted into a mercenary system to uphold the oppression of members of international American families who are outside our jurisdiction, but who are within the hearts and souls of international American families inside our jurisdiction, thus dividing international Americans, families inside our jurisdiction, between their love of family and their love of country, because they see their members of their family in China or Tibet or Iraq or Iran or Mexico being oppressed or assassinated by U.S. weapons, without the United States making an effort to mitigate and provide a similar level constitutional playing field for their other family members. And so it divides their love and their loyalty between their family being oppressed and the country in which they live as Americans with ancestry outside of our jurisdiction. So their hearts and their souls of the international American families inside our jurisdiction are thus divided between their love of family and their love of country. And this in turn consciously and unconsciously divides all Constitution-loving U.S. citizens from our government, because if our government promoted the domestic tranquility of international American families, our government would use rebated tariffs and charge China a fee to import goods that were made with labor in standard working conditions or below minimal wages, or that polluted the environment and caused harm to these families. And when we collected the tariffs at the import gate, we would reserve half of the funds to send back to China to be applied to improve working conditions and increase wages and bring up the standards to meet or exceed what we required of our own citizens here in the United States, so that the comparative advantage would have a savings account built in and mitigate any shortchanging of the overseas workers. Secondly, the peaceful and defensive use only of technology insurance would lower costs of business by providing more certainty and less risk and more productive use of assets, as well as a global pool of capital, $30 trillion conservatively invested, because the principal needs to be preserved to be able to pay claims. And the peace dividend from the increased certainty provided by that insurance would allow national treasuries worldwide to mint up the money without having to borrow it because of the increased value in their economies, like having a tree grow up in your yard, Jack and the Beanstalk, a new asset, the peaceful and defensive use of technology only insurance asset, adding to the balance sheet of nations worldwide and giving them a legitimate reason to print up additional currency, which would go into these savings accounts that couldn't be spent or invested in a risky investment because they have to be there in case they need to pay the insurance premium. And what else? To apply 100% consistent, unbiased logic to all people inside and outside U.S. jurisdiction who are affected by U.S. policies and trade, and thus make international Americans and all U.S. citizens sure there could be no more perfect union than that which we have at present, until time and progress should permit it to become more perfect. Thus, then, we could stand with any U.S. citizen in domestic tranquility because all had been done that could be done at this time. Instead of not doing what could be done and allowing exorbitant profits to be made by who extorts the labor and assets of other people on the pretext that it's outside your U.S. jurisdiction. We must renew our commitment to the profession of arms. We're not a profession simply because we say we're a profession. We must continue to learn, to understand. Martin E. Dempsey, General, U.S. Army, Chairman of the Joint Chieves and Chieftesses of Staff. There's a learning lesson right there. It's more than the Joint Chiefs. It's the Joint Chieves and Chieftesses of Staff. We must continue to learn, to understand from the oldest profession and its skills, attributes, and behaviors regarding stand alone or stand with. The prostitution, the oldest profession, it's all about standing alone or standing with, whose choice, to what degree, for how long. The difference between being a sex slave and being an equal partner in a moral marriage that makes each partner as equal as the teeth on a comb. This has been a response from WLH, aka Haji MAO, Haji MAO-AIB, unpaid unofficial volunteer, U.S. citizen and honorary world citizen. This has been a response to Martin E. Dempsey, General, U.S. Army, Chairman of the Joint Chieves and Chieftesses of Staff. It has no bearing on Rick Santorum's current response to General Martin Dempsey. That news was learned of only after who surfaced from spending several hours today writing this response.